Today is Tuesday, August 23rd, 2011. The time is 9:07 and we are in Boston, Massachusetts. My name is Lisa Morera, and here with me are our videographers, Andy Hoffman and Kevin Harrington, our court reporter, Tony Beckwith, and Julius Crouch, born on 11/1/43, who is an Army veteran of the Vietnam War, achieving the rank of Major. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Can you please tell me where you were born?
St. Louis County, Missouri.
And tell us about your family. Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I have one sister,
And what is her name?
Audrey.
And what did you do before entering the service?
I was a college student. And I graduated, that's funny. I graduated from Lincoln University of Missouri in 1966 and acquired a job with the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company. I just got started in my job and I got greetings. It's time for you to come on active duty. I thought I was going to be delayed going on active duty to go to graduate school. However, they brought me up in, I do believe it was September of 66.
Have any other members of your family served?
My great-grandfather was served in the Civil War, but that's the only other one I know of so far.
So you were commissioned. You didn't enlist voluntarily? Or
I was
drafted?
commissioned through the ROTC program.
Okay. So tell us about leaving for training camp and what your early days were like.
Well, I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky for officer basic course. It was just like being back in school. I completed the officer's basic course, and there was a gap between officer's basic course and my time in flight school. And so I remained at Fort Knox for a month or so. Then I went to Fort Walters, Texas, to the primary helicopter school. Then I completed that training and went to Fort Rucker for advanced helicopter school. Had an incident with one of the flight instructors. Fort Rucker, Alabama in 1966 and 1967 wasn't the best place to be if you were a black man. And I got my class, first I got my class changed. I was moved from one class to another. And then I was removed from the flight school.
Okay. Was it difficult to adapt to your military lifestyle, the barracks, the physical regimen?
Well, I really wasn't living in the barracks. I lived off base with my wife and later my daughter.
Okay, so you went to flight school. Do you have any other specialized training?
Yeah, I went to the psychological warfare school at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, prior to going to Vietnam.
And what happened when you went there? Not to Vietnam, to the psychological
Warfare school?
Yes.
It was interesting. I was going to Vietnam as a MACV PSYOPS advisor, and so I went to the school and learned how to accomplish the psychological warfare effort.
Okay. So you said you went to Vietnam. Tell us the details of your trip.
I went to Vietnam. I left St. Louis and went to Travis Air Force Base, California. From there to Hawaii, and from there into the Republic of South Vietnam. It was an interesting trip. I arrived in Vietnam, then was transported up country to 3 Corps Tactical Zone where I would be operating as a MACV advisor. And we lived in I guess it was an old apartment building or hotel. All the advisors lived in this one compound, and that's where I went.
Okay. Did you make lifelong friends?
Yeah, there are people there that I run into even till today. You know, the military way of life is a strange life. You meet people. As a matter of fact, I've met a guy from the time I was involved in the military since I've been here this week. We were in, well, as a matter of fact, we were at the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute in the same class. And so you meet people that you continually run into the rest of your life. That's just the military way of life, you know. Some of them become good friends, some of them become acquaintances and associates, but it's people you will probably see from time to time the rest of your life.
Were you able to stay in touch with your family while you were in Vietnam? Was it difficult to communicate?
It
with
was
them?
difficult. No phone calls. Only time I tried to call was during the holiday season. Most of it was by mail and packages back and forth between my family and myself.
How long were you in Vietnam?
11 months, and I believe it was 22 days. 11 months, 22 days. I got out early.
Did you have any spare time or anything while you were there?
Oh yeah, you always had spare time. It was when I wasn't in the field, we had an office compound where we worked. I worked day to day with my Vietnamese counterpart. And you worked 8 to 5, and in the evenings you'd gather around and play cards or laugh and talk or listen to music or do these types of things. Sometimes in the evenings I had to go out with my counterpart because that is the time they would go into the villages and go in to visit the troops in various locations. And I'm talking about South Vietnamese troops. And I would have to go along and be supportive of their efforts.
Were you actually in combat?
There was no place in the Republic of South Vietnam where you were not in combat.
Really? Forgive me.
Okay? I never left home without at least 2 guns.
Did you ever have to fire them?
Yes.
Okay. So you said you stayed there for almost a year. And what happened after that? Did you come back home or were you stationed somewhere else?
Well, I came back from the Republic of South Vietnam. Where did I go when I come back? Let me see. I think I came back and went to Fort Riley, Kansas, where I commanded a tank unit, tank company for a year. And a lot of the troops in my tank company had been stationed in Germany earlier, and they had rotated back to the States, so that was an interesting crew.
How so?
Well, they had been together for years, a lot of the people in my unit. And I had a group of younger troops and NCOs who liked to party a lot. And as the commanding officer, it got to be a funny joke between me and the sheriff of a nearby town. The first time I had to go and pick up some of my troops, it was rather traumatic for me because I hadn't done it before, but it got to the point that it was a regular thing, you know, that every payday somebody was going to end up there. So the sheriff and I got to be on first name basis. But it was an interesting assignment. I ran a tank company. They liked to party, but they were good troops. They took care of business, and we excelled at what we did. I stayed at Fort Riley, commanded the company. Then I left Fort Riley and went back to Fort Knox, Kentucky, to the Army Officers Advanced Course. Spent some time doing that. I think I also went back to, you know, people don't realize when you're in the military, they send you to school a lot. I also took a senior officers maintenance course while I was there. Fort Knox is just like living in any community. You go to school from 8 or 10 to 5, and then you're off the rest of the day unless you're on an exercise or something. We lived in a housing area, you know, my wife, my daughter, and I. It just so happened that I had my father's brother lived about 60 miles south of Fort Knox, so I had family in the area that I could visit, and my wife got to know that part of my family while I was there, and my daughter did too. So it was a good assignment for us.
And how long was your entire stint in the Army?
8 years. I spent 8 years on active duty. I was going to make it a career, but it's odd that I became very involved in equal opportunity work in the Army when there was no equal opportunity work in the Army. It all started with the flight school incident. When I left flight school, the reason I left, one of my IPs called me a nigger. And of course, I didn't react very well to that. Plus, I was, to say, a little stressed. We lived in a place where I didn't live in Dothan. I'm trying to think of the name. It's a little place right outside Fort Rucker, Alabama. And I had called on the telephone and rented my trailer. When I showed up at the lieutenant colonel's house, who owned this trailer, to pick up my keys, it got real funny because he said, "Oh my God." He said, "Let me talk to you, Julius. You're going to have some problems." I said, "Well, I won't be the only one, the only black from my class living in the court, because another individual who had his bought a trailer at Fort Walters, had it shipped to Fort Rucker, and he was living in the same trailer park. So he said, if you have any problems, just let me know. But problems, yeah, the police follow you and try to catch you having liquor in your cabinet because it was a dry area and all of that type of thing. But other than that, that was okay. But that started my involvement in civil rights, really, in the military. And ever since then, I've been involved with civil rights and equal opportunity in the military, even since I've left the military, and do a lot of work even today with Department of Defense equal opportunity.
And so when did you actually get out of the Army? When did you return home?
I got out of the Army in, I believe it was 1972. I wanted to make the military a career.
Right.
I saw the handwriting on the wall from my involvement in civil rights. It wasn't going to be an easy way to go. So I decided I would get out. And I got out of the Army, went back home to St. Louis, got a job at Scott Air Force Base as a race relations instructor. Went back to the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute as a student. So I was working for the Air Force at Scott, teaching military individuals how people should be treated and trying to create the change necessary to make it a better place for African Americans.
Have you been successful, I hope?
There's been some success, but there's still problems. There's still problems on a number of areas. Right now, I think the biggest problem they're having in my discussion with the people who are doing that work is the sexual assault problems they're having in the combat zones over in Afghanistan and Kuwait. There are still race problems. And as our military becomes more and more diverse, I expect that there will be a continuing problem of equity and opportunity for various groups.
So where were you when the war ended?
When the Vietnam War ended, where was I? 1975. I believe I was in St. Louis and had purchased my own home by then, and was sitting at home when they were bringing the people out of Saigon. I was sitting at home watching it on television. Um, it's I remember them seeing it on television and seeing them getting out of Vietnam. So that was around, what, 75, 76, 75, I believe it was.
And what was your reception like as someone who was a vet of the Vietnam War? From, from your family
home,
first, and then from perhaps the
all the
community?
family was proud and glad that I was back home, you know. But I'll never forget getting off the plane in San Francisco, walking through San Francisco International, people calling you killer, calling you names, spitting at you, you know. I got off at Lambert Airport in St. Louis, and people looked at me, and you know, it was, we didn't get the welcome home that the troops are getting today.
Right.
You know, people were kind of looking at us as the boogeymen, like we were doing something wrong in Vietnam. I believed in what we were doing in Vietnam.
Do you believe that stigma, if I can call it that, still exists for you today as a Vietnam vet?
Vietnam vets have I like use a term my grandmother used to learn, a long road to hoe. You know.
A long road to hoe?
Yeah, you know, you got a hoe, and you're getting the weeds out. It's a long ways down that line. We've come a long way. But A, is the stigma still there? Yes, it is. Are Vietnam vets still suffering? Yes, it is. Are we addressing that suffering? No, we're not. I run into friends from time to time. We can get out and we can start talking about it. But we ain't gonna talk about it with nobody else.
No one will understand.
If you hadn't been there and done that, you wouldn't understand that. Things happened in Vietnam. And as you have seen, I was reluctant to talk about what I did in Vietnam. I think what I did was worthwhile. I made a contribution to the effort. That was the job. I lived with the Vietnamese people as a MACV advisor while I was in Vietnam. I got to know them fairly well. Was even adopted by a local Vietnamese family. Their house was between where we lived and our working location. And it started off with me speaking to the little girl in the house every day when I went by, you know, that type of thing, and got to know them. It's a lovely country. I'd like to go back one day and see it without having a shotgun in my lap and a 45 in my side.
Right. Was it difficult, do you think, for yourself to adjust to the civilian life when you returned?
An incident that happened. When I was in Vietnam, I was able to purchase a few suits. Had them tailor-made over there, you know. Came home. Put on my tailor-made suit. I guess I'd been home a week, maybe less. Walked out of the house with my wife and daughter, going to church, and a car backfired. Next thing I know, I'm around the side of the house with the whole front of that suit ripped off, because all I did was respond. You know, I hadn't readjusted yet to being in the real world. I just jumped. It scared my wife and daughter, but hey, that's what I've been doing for a year. So it's an adjustment, but it takes time. You know.
How long do you think it took you?
Have I finished?
Have you?
That's my question. Have I finished? I don't know. You know, it's not as intense as it used to be. I still don't like to talk about it.
Well, I know you mentioned that you have maintained contact with some of your fellow veterans.
Yeah.
Are you a member of any veteran organizations?
You mean VFW, American Legion, that type of thing? No.
That type of thing. Okay, and one last question. How has your wartime experience affected your life, and what lessons do you think you learned from your military service?
I have a totally different view and perspective of the world than I had before.
In what way?
People are not good or bad. We fight wars over personality conflicts, which bothers me, but the people caught in the middle of it ain't got nothing to do with it. It's others that cause these wars to continue to die. I would love to see war end completely. I don't think it ever will, because that's been the way it is. If you look at war historically, it's always because of somebody got mad at somebody else because of something and it spread. Okay? I view with skepticism when they tell us about Afghanistan and about Iraq. Most of the people in those countries don't want a war. There are a few that understand why it's going on, but it's not something they want. We've been lucky in America. We haven't had to fight one on our own soil. And I think if we ever have to, it'll change America's total perspective on war, because it has an impact that changes the way all the people live and see their future and that whole thing.
Hopefully we'll have a day where there won't be any more war, but I think I'm with you saying if
Well,
it is,
there's
it's
a
far
book I
away.
read sometimes that says there'll always be wars and rumors of wars. And once there's a rumor of war, somebody's going to shoot at somebody and off we go to the races again. But it's getting to the point with all the technology and type of weapons we have that it's going to be counterproductive. It's going to be, you know, we're moving, if we continue toward total annihilation, I think we need to back off and take a look at what we're doing.
I agree with you. And Mr. Crouch, I would like to thank you for sitting for this interview today, and I would like to thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you.